Welcome everyone to Beyond Brooks for January. I'm Janie Heuck, the Managing Director of Brooks Wine. And you're one of your hosts for today. And I want to wish you all a very happy new year. There is not a lot I can do to control our world right now, but what I am promising you is a really great adventure for the next hour and a half into the Willamette Valley and into the world of kombucha with Matt Thomas. I want to tell you a little bit how I met Matt and what inspired us to invite him to be our guest today. I sit in a CEO roundtable of other wine leaders in California, Oregon, and Washington, and we meet quarterly and swap secrets, swap shop, and how we're running our businesses. And we always have guest speakers come in from industries outside of wine to inspire us and to teach us some transferable strategies about how they run their business. And Matt came to present to our group back in, I think it was November of 2018. He has a great story, so I can't wait for him to share that with you. And what really struck me when he was presenting was his commitments to 1% for the planet and also being a certified B Corporation. At the time that I heard Matt speak, we were just in the process. We had submitted our application for our B Corp certification and we're just in conversations with the folks at 1% for the planet. And so he really kind of pushed me over the edge to know that companies can do it and what an achievement it could be. And I just found everything that he was doing super inspiring. So I'm excited to welcome Matt today. But before I do that, I want to introduce you to Bree Boskov. Bree is a master of wine who is our moderator for these webinars. She is a dear friend and amongst other things is one of the top educators of Oregon and Oregon wine. And I mentioned she is a master of wine as well. And she is a lot of the brains behind Beyond Brooks and is going to share with you more about the program and the connective tissue between us and Brew Dr. Kombucha today, as well as guide us through the tasting. So Bree, welcome.
Thank you, Janie. And I'm thrilled to be here as always. And that this program really began from Janie and I coming together. It was over, well, it was nearly a year ago now when we started discussing, how we could stay in touch with each other when COVID shut us down, basically, and how we could keep our community engaged and together. And so Beyond Brooks is it, and this is really where we started seeing connective tissue with other businesses. So Janie actually forgot to do the toast. So I am going to kick off the toast for 2021 and for this Beyond Brooks. And this is allowing everyone to start day drinking. It's possible. We can still do that in January. And so why we began these programs was to really still continue to connect. And so our toast is to continually live through the lens of others' passions and connect with our community and their craft. So cheers, everyone. Happy 2021 and welcome to Beyond Brooks. Okay, we came together to discuss how we could all continue to be together for Beyond Brooks and came up with a list of great companies that inspire us and that we love to learn from. And then one of our core components and philosophies for this was, how do we give back to our community? We're connecting with all of you by bringing in new stories for you and new producers, but we really wanted to have a giving component for the Beyond Brooks program. Steve, can you bring up the slide for our partners? Oh. And so this Assemblage is our partner now for the next 3 months for Beyond Brooks. And Assemblage are a group of founded by women in the Oregon wine industry. It's an annual symposium and organization aimed at the advancement, empowerment, and education of women and diverse communities in the wine industry. It began here in Oregon, but it really does transcend. Sorry, I'm trying to align myself. Transcend beyond our industry. And it was actually this week in 2020 when we kicked off the first Assemblage Symposium. And so we continue to build workshops and introduce seminars, and $5 from every Beyond Brooks goes towards the Assemblage Foundation and the work that they're continuing to try to do within our wine industry and community for women and diverse communities. Also, as always, everything that you purchase from Brooks goes towards 1% for the planet, and they are a B Corp as well. So Janie's going to talk a little bit about that a little later, and so will Matt, obviously, because this is where their connective tissue is that they're both 1% for the planet and B Corps. I just want to touch on some housekeeping first. If anyone has any stalled segments or pauses for troubleshooting, just keep trying to refresh your browser, that little semicircle with the arrow up on top of your browser window. Hit that and it should refresh. If you don't have, if you do have some problems with that, then go into the troubleshooting and put the link into the troubleshooting in chat, and they will help you out there. How the chat and Q&A works is we vote on the questions that you're putting into the chat and Q&A. So if someone puts in a question for Matt or for Janie, and then someone else thinks, oh, that's a great question, I was going to ask that, just hit that their like, essentially, and that'll keep moving them up to the top. So we'll answer that question first. And then for the agenda for today, we're going to talk about the connectivity between Brooks and between Brew Doctor, and also hear Matt's amazing story and where Brew Doctor is going. And then we have a bit of a fun lineup to play with. I think this is one of the most fun Beyond Brooks yet, because there's so much in this little pack. So we have the tea, which we're going to talk about, and Matt is going to tell us all the details about how to brew the perfect tea, where he gets his supplies from, how he got into tea, and then we're going to go into the kombucha, tasting the kombucha, and moving along that way. And then we're going to go into the story of the wines, a little bit of history about the wines, and then we're going to have some fun blending exercises just to, spice things up a little bit. And of course, at the end of the program, there is always the lounge. So we're going to head into the lounge for 30 minutes for after the program ends, and we can chat and have a drink together and ask any other questions that you may have come up with. You should have 4 glasses in front of you so that you can taste every beverage, and then we're going to have a little fun mixing them together at the very end. And then there will also be the opportunity to visit the Brew Doctor website and Brooks website at the end as well, when Janie comes back on screen and discusses the next program. So, as I mentioned, there is a large amount of interconnectivity between Brooks and Brew Doctor. Both are B corporations and both are 1% for the planet members. And 1% of the Planet is a program that was founded by Patagonia's founder, Yvon Chouinard. And the point is basically that we work and take from this planet and live off of this planet. And so to be good citizens of this planet and good companies on this planet, we need to give back. So 1% of profits go to 1% for the planet. And then what 1% for the planet does is they direct those funds to the other nonprofit organizations that Brooks and Brew Doctor and other companies have selected. So work that's important to them, but it all revolves around environmental nonprofits that have to be certified by 1% for the planet to be accepted into the program. And for Brew Doctor, it is the love revenues. So every time you purchase a can of this delicious kombucha, you are putting 1% of the profits towards Matt's choice. And For Brooks, it goes towards Kiss the Ground, which we have a Beyond Brooks coming up with them in a few months as well, which will be super fun. And they have some really great webinars and documentaries that they've done around saving the soil and carbon farming and things like that. B Corps are relatively new business that balances purpose and profit. And so they are legally required to consider the impact of all of their decisions on their workers, on their customers, on their suppliers, community, and the environment. And so this is a large community of leaders, and it's a global movement that is using business as a force for good. There's nearly 4,000 companies that are B Corps across 150 industries in nearly 75 countries. But it has one unifying goal, which is to use their business for good. Portland is especially active in the B Corp community, and I know we tend to touch on B Corp in every Beyond Brooks because most of our companies that we choose to align with are B Corps because we all share the same philosophies. So, and in the wine industry, actually, Oregon actually has the most B Corps of any industry and in the wine industry. So the wine industry here is really committed to that philosophy of doing good. Both Brooks and Brew Doctor have a lot of examples of how being a certified B Corp and 1% of the planet member really is reflected in their stories and in their products and in their people. For example, Brooks really began from Jimmy Brooks's involvement in the Oregon wine community. He led the biodynamic farming movement in the Willamette Valley. And he was doing good for the land and for the community. He was teaching people how to be biodynamic farmers and the benefits of biodynamic farming. So when he passed, it was a group of those same community of winemakers and farmers who really came together to support Janie and Chris, the winemaker, and to really bring the winery back into, or still continue into making wine and continuing the great work that Jimmy was doing, and allowing for that legacy of the Brooks Winery to be passed down to Jimmy's son, Pascal. So we're going to hear a little more of the examples through Brooks and Matt's stories today. And I would like to, these are all of the wineries who contributed to Jimmy's story and helping bring up the next vintage when Jimmy passed very suddenly. Matt, would you like to come up to the stage now and tell us your story? I know there is a lot of connective tissue with B Corp and 1% for the planet and to Brooks. So I don't want to steal any of your thunder here. But you have such a fascinating story. When I went to visit you at the Kombucha distillery, brewery, fermentation space in Tigard, it was just so fascinating to hear how it all began, and really to be in a factory that produces, bottled beverages, but it smells like you're going to an aromatherapy spa. So it was just a really unique experience for me, and I would love for you to tell your story to everyone.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Bree. Can you hear me okay? Audio's good? Great. Well, first of all, obviously honored to be invited, to share this time with you guys. And, when I met with Janie and the wine industry CEOs, I had, I think, 2 hours to go through my story and all the side paths that you can go down when telling the arc of a business. So unfortunately, we'll do a much more abbreviated version here, or maybe fortunately. I think it's, first off, it's so great to see the momentum behind, 1% for the planet and B Corp. I think it's a lot, if I had to draw a similarity, it would be how, the organic food movement has been going for a long time, but it's really gotten mainstream in the last decade or so. I think that businesses operating with the values that go into B Corp certification and aligning with 1% for the planet, is a very logical and common sense way to grow a sustainable business that's a proper, a positive part of its community. So I think that you'll see, and I think we've seen in Oregon, and we'll start to see around the country, a lot more B Corps becoming certified and committing to that care for people, community, and planet, like we have. So I think we just saw Tillamook Cheese got B Corp certification, which is a pretty big entity right there. So really great to see larger organizations as well as small going after the certification and making that commitment. Let's see, Steve, if you want to start us off on my tea house slide there. Yeah, it looks like we got it. So this is where it all began. I originally started my company based on a business plan I wrote at the University of Oregon in 2002. I was a tea drinker in college, not so much into coffee, and I had kind of gone down, I bought every box of tea bags you could buy in the grocery store and sought out loose leaf tea where I could find it, and really loved the idea of just this world of tea, and that tea means so many different things in different cultures, and there are a lot of different ways in which people enjoy tea. And I thought, what was missing, the kind of this underserved niche opportunity, was one place to enjoy tea in all its different forms. Whether it's classical teas, British style, or herbal wellness teas, or Taiwanese bubble tea, or Indian chai recipes. That was the idea originally. And I guess I would say I had uninspiring enough jobs right out of college that I was really became more and more interested in becoming an entrepreneur. And I raised $45,000 to start the first Townsend's Tea House there in Northeast Portland in 2006. So just spent a couple of years there trying to figure out how to get people to come see this little space I had made, and then building out a menu, a tea list, if you will. That kind of went after that mission of how is tea made across the world. And we were doing pretty well, and I started that first one, again, with a little bit of money from friends and family. Started a second one at the end of 2007 with $35,000 of personal credit card debt. Went to the bank and said, I'm ready to start a second tea house. Can I get a loan? And they said, no, you can get a credit card for $7,000. And so I said yes, and I got 4 more. And so I got 5 credit cards, each for about $7,000 in limit, and just maxed them out, building my second tea house. Such is the naive confidence of someone in their 20s, I think, running their own little business. And then in the middle of 2008, people started coming into the tea house, which was known as a place where tea was explored, and asking if we made kombucha. I didn't know what kombucha was at the time, and so enough people were starting to ask about it or bring in bottles of kombucha that were made in California that I was like, okay, I got to make this. It's tea. My business is to celebrate tea in all its forms, and so had an employee who was actually making it at home, and she said, oh yeah, I can bring in a scoby, which is this little starter thing you need to kick off the fermentation, and we can do it together. And so we started just making a jar in the kitchen of the tea house, and 2 jars, and then 3 jars, and as soon as it was made, it takes about a week to ferment in that small of a size. And I'll get into how kombucha is made in a later slide. But anyway, people were buying it very quickly. We found that we were making a very delicious form of kombucha, and it kind of was in part due to the fact that we had crafted all these different tea recipes for service in the tea house that translated really well to just fermenting them, adding sugar, fermenting them, and serving them as kombucha. So I really saw it as an opportunity because I was a business student and I wanted to grow a business around something I enjoyed, which was tea. I saw it as an opportunity to grow something potentially much bigger, much faster. Opening tea house after tea house was going to be a grind, right? And I was like, okay, I can make a bunch of this from one place, and the classic story of a brewery kind of concept. So we leased out the basement of this tea house you see here, and started making it there. And for about 6 or 8 months, we went from a table, with 10 jars on it, to a rack of 40, to eventually we had, I think, 400 5-gallon containers of kombucha fermenting in this very small, like 800 square foot basement. And it gives off CO2 in an acetic fermentation. So everything started smelling like vinegar. You know, all of my employees who worked in the tea house would say, everything smells like vinegar. I go home and my boyfriend or girlfriend says I smell like vinegar, and you can just walk by the tea house and just kind of this fermentation smell hits you. So I knew we were maxing out our space there. And so, you know, again, you know, the credit cards are maxed out. I wasn't bankable. So Whole Foods Market actually had something called a local producer loan program. And Steve, if you want to go to the next slide. At the end of 2009, there's me with my first tank. And our first little four-head bottling line. You know, everything to this point in the basement was extremely manual, you know, filter screens and funnels, right? And printing our own labels and every little thing. And so this was huge automation for me. And I couldn't believe the size of that tank right at the time. So we moved out of the basement in around October 2009. Started making kombucha in a 4,000 square foot above ground space in southeast Portland, and then over the next kind of 4 years, just grew on our own profit. We kept reinvesting in the company. We were doing every little part of the operation, and so we weren't relying on distributors. We were distributing ourselves, so we were keeping all of the profit margin that goes into sale, from creation to sale, which was a good way to grow a business in its early days, for sure.
And so you were mostly based in Portland at that point then, and not exporting out of the state.
Yeah, really. We had spanned Oregon, and we'd gotten up into Washington, mostly around Seattle at that point. But it was at that point that we first got exposed to just like an industry ranking, and we found out in 2015 that we were actually the third largest kombucha company in the world because it was so early in the industry of kombucha. And at that point I thought, okay, well, if I'm just doing this and serving the Pacific Northwest, there's a really big opportunity here. And so that's when I really was able to get we were finally able to get banked and get a couple $1 million of a SBA-backed loan and work to build out a true brewery. So Steve, if you want to flip to the next slide for us. We went from this tank here to these guys here are 9,000 gallons, and they're 13 feet wide by about 12 feet tall. And so that's what we moved to fermenting our kombucha in. And when we started this larger brewery, which is in Tualatin, Oregon, it's 50,000 square feet. We could afford this many tanks. We got 20 of these, and that was enough to handle our growth for the next couple of years. Now we have 3 times as many of these fermentation tanks. We have over 500,000 gallons of tank capacity. Our fermentation takes 3 to 5 weeks, so we need that much space for the time that it takes. So we saw a huge amount of growth. Obviously, when we moved out of the basement into the above ground space, and we had a little bit of automation finally, and then we kind of grew steadily. 2011, 12, 13. First $1 million year kind of thing. And then we jumped up very quickly to like 5 million in revenue, and we were going to run out of capacity again. And that's why once I found out that we were a large player in the world of kombucha, I signed my name as personal guarantor and went ahead and got as much bank debt as I could and built out this facility. And Steve, if you want to go to the next slide. So that, first little 4-head filler moved to this high-speed bottling line, where we're bottling 90 bottles a minute. A much different situation than we were used to. So this allowed for us to grow again exponentially. And again, we were so early in kombucha, right? So many entrepreneurs have, they are asked if you were lucky or smart, and it's always a mix, right? I was, I think, smart enough to recognize an opportunity, but lucky enough that the opportunity of being early in the world of kombucha and of having already developed the skill of working with tea and understanding, how kombucha could be made to taste what I think is its best. Very fortunate to have been in a place in my career where I was ready to go after that growth. So this is just a photo of our high-speed bottling line.
And if anyone else was the same as me, in 2011, I still had kind of frightening looking scobies in big jars that you didn't want to put it in your mouth, the smell of the stuff. So, so to have something that is as clean and refreshing and delicious, it's not for me. I was like, this is not worth the effort if I'm terrified of poisoning myself.
No, I mean, I definitely encourage people to try to make kombucha at home if they find that they love kombucha and it's a daily habit they're interested in, because there are so many different ways to make it in terms of what flavors you can add. Steve, if you want to go to the next slide. This is just a shot, from a photo shoot we did, right, where we kind of had everything laid out on a table. But you can see those jars with the cloth tops there. That's, when you're making it at home or on, a very small batch, that's probably what you're going to see. And I guess what you don't see there is the SCOBY, right? So SCOBY is an acronym, SCOBY, stands for Symbiotic Colony of Bacteria and Yeast. And really, it's the byproduct of the fermentation process, because the yeast and bacteria are doing their work, eating the sugar in the tea, the caffeine in the tea, and interacting with the other very dynamic mix of naturally occurring yeast and bacteria to create organic acids, to create beneficial bacteria and more yeast. And then the byproduct is this pellicle. It's it's a cellulose mat, if you will, that floats on top. It will get produced no matter what. You can make a batch of kombucha with no SCOBY, but starting with about 20%. So all of our batches, the sweetened tea is added to 20% finished, previously fermented kombucha. And the SCOBY will just grow as a byproduct of all that tea fermenting into one large batch of kombucha. But the dynamic, the SCOBY really provides a population of a whole bunch of different bacteria and yeast that aren't always present in the liquid in such high numbers. And so that's why a lot of people like to say you need a SCOBY to start it. I think a healthy fermentation starts with a SCOBY in the kombucha, and we certainly always add ours. And yes, ours are 13 feet wide because they just grow to the size that they're able to, right? So the surface area of the tank or the vessel they're in. So our SCOBYs are very, very large, and when it comes time to compost them, it can be a chore to get them out of the tanks.
Wow, that's terrifying. I think I would have nightmares.
I mean, it really is. Our brewery is a lot like a beer brewery or a winery. I think aspects of both, right? Yeah. Kombucha is an aerobic fermentation where you're inviting in all the different kinds of yeast and bacteria that are already in kombucha and that are in the natural environment. So that in that way, it's very different than beer and wine because you're not specifically controlling to a certain type of yeast. And for those, who know their yeast, kombucha relies a lot, or just has Brettanomyces as one of the dominant yeasts, which is typically not something that is sought after in
we don't want that in wine, but the brewers tend to like it, but we don't like it in wine so much. So how important is knowing that the fermentation process and the natural ingredients that are in there, how important is it to have fresh ingredients or organic ingredients for the SCOBY and the fermentation and the good probiotics to be present?
Really, you want to make sure you don't have a vessel that's narrow and deep because the bacteria and yeast can get stressed, as you guys know, if they're under a lot of pressure. So we'll do pump overs, right? We're removing the liquid around, so there isn't this stratifying of disgruntled yeast, if you will, in the tank. I think it's really important to have a great water source. We're fortunate in the Pacific Northwest to have a very good water supply. We use 100% organic ingredients, so organic cane sugar, organic tea, and organic botanicals. And as a B Corp, we try, and you're evaluated on how close your supply chain is so that you can, again, shrink your carbon footprint as much as possible. So we try to find as many herbs and botanicals that are grown close to home and happily White Salmon Washington is a big producer of peppermint. We use a lot of organic peppermint. We get a lot of, I think, rosemary and sage as well from the local areas. Obviously, tea is very difficult to grow in the U.S., I think at a profit, so still relying on Chinese tea, but happy to support the organic tea movement, which is, again, something that I think was a little bit behind the U.S. Organic food movement, and a lot was spurred on by people demanding or willing to pay more for something that was certified organic, so they could trust that they weren't, having some residual pesticide in their food supply. So, we like to use a lot. We count ourselves as we'll use as much of an ingredient as it takes to get great flavor, right? And we'll figure out the profitability, through the relationship with the retailer, or the price we set it at. But we always want to make the absolute best quality tasting. We know that taste wins in the end, no matter what you do. So it's got to taste fantastic. But
is there a certain type of tea that works best for those flavors, or can you use any tea?
We typically use green, black, and oolong teas. So we use a mix. We use primarily a green tea. I think it just depends on what tastes good with the botanicals, right? So like the Love tea that you guys have is a jasmine green tea with rose petals, lavender, chamomile blossoms, and that tastes really good together. Whereas the superberry tea that you have is just the berry portion of the tea that we use in the superberry kombucha. We use an oolong tea as the tea base for that superberry kombucha that isn't in the tea that you were delivered. But again, the superberry is a blend. What you do have is the blend of currants, hibiscus, elderberries, and then we also add in some blueberry and raspberry juice into that one. There's goji berries in this blend as well. So some dried ingredients and some fresh juices. I think when we're developing new flavors, we like to make things like tea if we can, right? Where we have dried ingredients, we're making a delicious pot of tea, if you will, 9,000 gallons. But if the flavor demands it, that we want, we have an island mango, right? That tastes great, I think, because we use a fresh ginger juice and we use a fresh mango juice, and that goes with fermented the green tea kombucha. It's about 6% juice content, so we will do flavors like that as well. And a lot of people
if you're using the juice component, do you need to use less cane sugar then for that fermentation?
Yeah, you can ferment it a little longer. We're constantly checking the fermentations for bricks, and alcohol content also is an indicator of how our fermentation is doing, and then microbial content as well. And speaking to making kombucha at home versus how we do it, we are an authentic producer of kombucha. We make it just like you would make it at home on a much bigger scale. However, the one difference is we extract the alcohol out to make it a non-alcoholic beverage for all, so that everybody can drink it. And that was one of the in 2010 there was a big recall in kombucha because of the alcohol content. If you make kombucha at home, it very likely has an alcohol content of 1 to 3% alcohol. It's just yeast are going to create ethanol. It's what they do as part of the fermentation. So we want, and some brands will either water down or add a lot of juice or do some funky vinegar fermentation to limit the alcohol produced. We want to make kombucha in the traditional method that it's been made for centuries, and then apply a modern technology, a vacuum distillation called a spinning cone column, to extract the alcohol out without any heat. It really is a way of, through the removal of atmospheric pressure, we extract the ethanol out without hurting and harming any of the probiotic bacteria and yeast. And so that's what it's taken for us to hold firm to the idea of making real kombucha that we don't have to worry is going to get regulated to become a 21 and older product.
But I think that also contributes to the quality and the typicity of flavors of the products that you're using in the tea, because that's the one thing that I find, from a wine professional, where we're looking for, expressions of place and variety, but we're also still looking for a good producer who has consistency with that. And, before I met you, I remember saying to friends of mine here, oh, the kombucha market's great, but there's so much variability. Some of them you open up and it's gushing, they taste like vinegar. But Brew Doctor was always one that tastes exactly like, you can taste every component, but it's very clean and it's consistent. And so I appreciate that. I know that most probably wine professionals are gravitating towards Brew Doctor as a product for that. So thank you for bringing in the modern.
Being in Oregon and in southwest of Portland, right, we're very close to the wine industry here, and we've got quite a few folks who have worked either in the beer industry and have come through Oregon State University's fermentation program, or have been in the wine industry. And so we've, when we've had fermentation issues, we now have the capabilities in-house, the laboratory, and the people who can pinpoint, here's what's wrong, ACTPY got into this batch, and here's how we have to limit that in the future. All those things that can create those off notes in fermentation.
In fermentations, and we do have a very strong fermentation culture in Oregon and in the Pacific Northwest. Matt, there was one question that came through about the fundraising for your first operation. How were you able to get others to buy into your vision?
Well, let's see. I was, fresh out of college and very ambitious. And I had written the business plan at the U of O and kept it. And so when I decided I wanted to start the business in earnest, I went back in and spent nights and weekends after the jobs I was working, really dialing in the financials, trying to vet out the financials of how I could make it work with so little investment, and kind of trying to get to the dollar, what it would take to make it work. And then it was willing to work for nothing, right? I essentially paid myself tips that first year plus. And, my wife and I, we had a very small house, but in the winter, we'd heat one room and we called it the cozy room, and we threw TV in there, and the very cold nights we'd sleep in that room. So we definitely had that entrepreneurial. She worked for nonprofits, so was making somehow less than I was. So it was friends and family, right, too. So and I would take money. I would take as little money as somebody wanted to put in, right. So I took a $250 investment from my wife's grandma, kind of thing, and happy to say that wasn't just a loan; it was an investment. So they actually got shares of the company, and they've since made very good on the investment. So I was happy, and that was also something that kept me going early on. That first year plus was very difficult, and there were moments when maybe if it would have just been my money on the line, I would have been like, I need to go get a real job. This is silly, but I didn't want to call Uncle Bob and Aunt Susie and say, the $2,000 you gave me is gone. I'm never going to pay you that back. So I was very driven by the fact that I didn't want to let the people down who had backed me.
Yeah, and having that vision, I mean, to start a tea house in a region that's renowned for coffee is definitely you're up for a challenge.
Absolutely.
So Janie had a question about how long the production cycle is from start to market. I know you mentioned that the fermentation process is 3 to 5 weeks. That's including the second fermentation to get the bubbles.
So we don't do a secondary fermentation. So if you're making it at home, you're going to want to ferment your kombucha to the point where it's just a tiny bit sweeter than you would like it, but it tastes good. And then you're going to want to put it in a closed bottle or some other jar or vessel and leave it at ambient temperature, and the fermentation will continue, this secondary fermentation, to bottle condition, right, to create the carbonation. And what happens in there is you consume more sugar, you create more alcohol, and you create the CO2. But that would be extremely difficult to keep any semblance of consistency on a mass scale. for the amount that we need to produce, to constantly know exactly that we were going to have the same amount of carbonation. They were going to have the same nutrition facts, sugar content, that the flavor profile would be the same. And then the hard thing about what we do is we go to a lot of work to take the alcohol out. If you then bottle condition it, you're going to spike that alcohol back up 0.5%, and that's all it takes.
Wow.
The limit to be a non-alcoholic product is 0.5% alcohol by volume, and our finished kombucha is around 1.5%. We remove the alcohol down to 0.1%, but if we then bottle conditioned, it would spike back above that 0.5. So we carbonate like a beer, right? We use a beer bright tank, and there's a slow carbonation stone, and so we force carbonate and bottle.
Great. And so all the way from start to market is about 5 weeks, or?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. So I mean, we brew the tea. So right, we take. You can go to the next slide, Steve, actually, if you want, because it's just kind of a good image of some of the ingredients. We take the tea and the botanicals, right? Botanicals, much like these, you have hibiscus, turmeric, roses, oranges, dried oranges there, lavender, etc. We blend the tea recipe that we're going to turn into kombucha. We put it in our brew tank, and then we add hot water and that we are dissolving organic sugar into. So we're adding, probably around 100 pounds of tea and botanicals into about 4,000 gallons of hot sweetened water. That steeps for about 30 to 40 minutes to get all the flavor released from the botanicals. And then that's cooled and then pumped over into fermentation. Right now, on a typical day, we brew 2 to 3 of the fermentation tanks. So we do anywhere from 18,000 to 27,000 gallons of tea every day, and that comes out to we're bottling about 500,000 bottles a week of our kombucha, and it's sold in all 50 states and across Canada at this point. And so yeah, we brew the tea, ferment it. Again, the fermentation, we watch it, and sometimes we'll, if our inventory says we have too much of this kombucha already, we'll want to slow that fermentation down, or if we need it, we'll want to speed it up. And so we have the little bit of levers we can pull, but really the fastest we can go is about 3 weeks to get the full fermentation. And I think we can slow it down such that it takes 5 or 6 weeks. So it's nice to have that flexibility, because the supply chain is difficult, when you have 12 different types of kombucha you're making, and this is selling well, and suddenly you've got an opportunity with Costco to sell this one, and you need to turn it on and quick. Your own manufacturer start to finish. You need to have those points in the supply chain where you have flexibility. The alcohol removal is fairly fast. Again, just like we brew about 20,000 gallons, we strip, we call it, and take the alcohol out of about that many gallons a day as well. But we have, obviously, we're constantly evaluating our capacity so that we can handle the growth that each year presents. And so we have plenty of capacity to grow. I think we're operating at around 45 to 50% of our possible capacity, which is good. And then, oh shoot, my family's just getting home. So then the alcohol removal process, again, within 1 day, and then bottling, is its own thing. So yeah, it's really the fermentation is the thing that takes the time.
A little more efficient than.
I'm going to talk to my family real quick.
Kimberly and Christian, I see your question about the sugar as well, and I agree. I don't like kombuchas that have a lot of sugar in them, and so I believe that I was just about to answer a question for you, Matt. There's a question about Brew Doctor having very little sugar in comparison to other kombuchas. Is that because of the carbonation process and the not bottle conditioning, or is it just a style?
No. I think we're fairly comparable to other brands. I think other brands maybe put a lot more juice, right? So they have that fructose sugar in there as well. the amount of sugar for us is, obviously we'd love to have as little as possible because there are people who really shop the nutrition facts panel. But again, we feel like taste wins. We want to have the right amount of sugar so that the flavor of the botanicals, the flavor of those fruit juices come through very well balanced with the sour and acidic notes of the kombucha. Again, kind of that, we want it to taste clean and not cloyingly sweet. But if we were to reduce the sugar content down, you would lose a lot of the flavor. It would taste much drier. And when we've done that, we've thought, hey, there's a win. There's a little less calories. There's less sugar in nutrition facts. But the kombucha starts selling a little bit slower. People complain, it tastes watery or something. And really, a lot of flavor and aroma comes through on sugar content.
On sugar, yeah.
So, in order to reduce it down, I don't like the imitation sugars, xylitol or monk fruits, or I think, again, we're committed to making kombucha the way that it produces the most naturally occurring live and active cultures and probiotics, and that's through just this traditional cane sugar fermentation.
Well, speaking of the process and of the flavors, I think it's time to actually start drinking or tasting kombucha. And to someone's point on the chat, this is my first time seriously tasting seriously kombucha. And yeah, I would say, I guess from a beverage professional perspective, we kind of assess everything out, liquid form that we put in our mouth. But I really had not put in the amount of detail until I came to visit you at the factory to see the process and thinking about all the steps. And it's just fascinating. And I appreciate drinking this so much more now as well, because of seeing how you taste every component of what you put in there, and you can really feel, see the transparency there and see the quality through to the end product. So that's super important. I might bring Janie up on screen now as well, so that she can taste and have a bit of a chat with us as well, as we sort of get into talking about each kombucha and the teas. So I think it's probably best to start with the love. For me, the love is like a white wine. So I would start, and the goji berry, the super berry, is a little bit more full bodied. So I started with the love. Matt, can you walk us through, I guess, how you came to this tea concoction? And
well, again, I think our tea houses were really these test laboratories, right? Because we have not only our staff who are constantly drinking and tinkering with all the teas, but we had our most committed and enthusiastic customers, our daily visitors. And so we would in making the first few flavors of kombucha, which we made in the basement of the tea house and in the kitchen of the tea house, it was just picking things out of the tea list that we thought would taste good as kombucha, and then presenting them, making this batch this week, this the next week, and seeing what people were most enthusiastic about. And the super berry was one of the very first ones in 2008 that we made, and so we've continued to make that one. And if you know our brand at all, our Clear Mind kombucha as well, which is one of our top sellers, was one of the very first ones we made. Love, we added a few years later, and we had developed a kind of an herbal apothecary line of teas at the tea house. And this one, was very much a bouquet, right? Lavender, rose, chamomile. And so, when we were testing kombuchas that we would then put into our tea houses, this one was really well received. And so we tried it regionally here at home in the Northwest, and it definitely performed well. And it's a great, we're the kombucha brand that started out very much in this kind of herbal focus, right? Where, again, using like Clear Mind is rosemary, sage, and mint, and dandelion root, and this one is very much those floral botanicals. So it's great for us to have these as kind of like our anchor, like legacy flavors, and then we've got the newer flavors that are maybe playing more with ginger or fruit flavors. But this is just a very clean, very, you can taste the bit of jasmine. I think the lavender comes through, but it's not like too perfumey. I think these blossoms just really support each other well, and none of them stand out over much. And again, yeah, if we called it like lavender rose or something like that, people might think they were going to drink potpourri. So I think we picked the right name when calling it love.
Yeah. And it's definitely really delicate, but does have that floral expression as well. It sort of does align a little bit with Pinot Gris and its flavor profile, because it, Pinot Gris doesn't tend to be that aromatic and, powerful on the palate. And compared to, like Clear Mind or the ginger turmeric that really have, punchy flavors to them that you can recognize, the Love is it's very soft and elegant and yeah, perfumey. It's lovely on the palate. But yeah, it doesn't have the potpourri character that you would think that if you read the ingredients.
Yeah, and it's been a great one for us to have as our 1% for the planet flavor, because we can kind of go on the marketability of the name Love, right? And during Pride Month, we make a love make our love kombucha with a label that says Love Wins, and with a rainbow theme, and the proceeds during that time go to the Trevor Project, which is the nation's largest suicide prevention hotline for LGBTQ. And I think, Janie, we wanted to hit on the other organizations that we are able to support through our 1% for the planet. We have long supported a Northwest nonprofit called Ecology in Classrooms and Outdoors. They teach outdoor science enrichment programs in grade schools. So basically bringing outdoor school to grade schools, typically in lower income districts where outdoor school or field trips maybe don't happen as much. So really kind of going in to try to inspire the next generation of climate change professionals and environmentalists. We've also the Surfrider Foundation and Solve here locally as well in the Northwest. How about you, Janie?
We, one of the things I love about Kiss the Ground is that we do get to direct our funds, and that we have so much opportunity to pick our partners as long as they're part of their network. And I made the decision to just pick one partner to start with, and that is Kiss the Ground, which they are an education company and media company based in Los Angeles that's all about farming and appropriate farming and the impact on our personal health as well as the health of the climate. So they just came out with a full documentary that Woody Harrelson is the host of, called Kiss the Ground, and that's on Netflix. That's great. They've done short films on biodynamics, and then they have a whole array of classes. So similar to your outdoor school, they do classes about appropriate farming, and that's going to be the topic of our April Beyond Brooks is going to be a home gardening class.
Nice.
Yeah, they're a great company. I think, especially for the wine industry, that, in Oregon here, we're talking so much about regenerative farming and no-till farming as well. So really trying to do that carbon farming and sequestering carbon in the soils and the farms instead of tilling and releasing it back to the atmosphere. So that they were really one of the first classes that really made sense to an industry, at an industry level when you're trying to introduce an industry to a new concept such as regenerative farming. So shall we taste the Pinot Gris from Brooks and then jump back to Matt for the superberry?
Sure.
Great.
So you all have a very successful line in front of you. We only made, I think, 75 cases of it this year. We have just less than an acre of Pinot Gris planted on our estate vineyard. It was planted in 1979. So it's some of the oldest Pinot Gris in the valley, some of the oldest vines in the valley. And it's been biodynamically farmed since 2002. So it is certified biodynamic. Which really just, on top of organic farming with the different preparations that we use really help to ensure the nutrition of the soil and the right microbial content that's the healthiest for the plant and the resulting fruit from it. So 2019. And I know, Bree, you want to give a little background on Pinot Gris in Oregon. My story about it is that it's a little bit of a cash crop because it took growers so long to figure out to make really good quality Pinot Noir. That same time of production to actually getting cash out of the market, they learned needed to be like 18 or so months. And so to put Pinot Gris in the ground, and you can heavily crop it. You can make a lot of wine from it. It's a pretty hardy plant, so you really can't mess up the farming. A little bit of that still going on in the valley, but also some people take it very, very seriously.
Yeah, I there's a couple of fun facts about Pinot Gris in Oregon and in the U.S. So Oregon was actually the first place in the U.S. to commercially produce Pinot Gris. And so that started with the plantings in the mid-60s from Richard Summers and David Lett and Charles Curry and Dick Erath. And they really spent a lot of time educating the U.S. market on Pinot Gris, because really the other, white varieties that were in the market at the time were pretty much Chardonnay and Riesling, which tended to be sweet, So Pinot Gris was sort of this in-between, wine, and it took a lot of their time to educate the U.S. market on this. But really, Pinot Gris is at home in Oregon. And then, unfortunately, it has gone through somewhat of a production, quandary in terms of being the cash cow and getting into market very quickly, and also competing with Italian Pinot Gris, which is known as Pinot Grigio. So it's the same grape variety, but the Italians crop it incredibly heavy and pump it out into the market very, very quickly. And it's almost like a flavorless, I don't know, mineral water spritzer or something, it's so like low in alcohol and flavorless. But the original producers in the valley here really, really did commit to making more of that Alsatian serious style of Pinot Gris. So Jason Lett at the Eyrie Vineyard, who is David Lett's son, continues to make much more of a style like what Brooks make, which is, they're picking on ripeness and on flavor, and then, fermenting it with wild yeasts and indigenous yeasts so that it can have a longer, slower fermentation and bring more complexity. And I love this Pinot Gris for that fruit component, which you just never find in Pinot Grigio, but it also has the freshness that Oregon delivers in all of its wines as well. So for me, some of the best Pinot Gris now are just, they're these serious styles that can age as well. They're medium bodied, and they can really find a place at the table. They're not just porch pounder. And then also Pinot Gris is actually a gray, or, it's actually more of a pink-skinned grape variety. So when you ferment it on skins, it actually makes kind of a dark rosé or a light red wine. And there's now, producers here that are fermenting it on skins, and it has a lot of flavor in its skins as well. It kind of has ginger and like taco truck kind of flavors in its skins as well. So there's now starting to emerge some, more fun, different thinking around this variety, which I would just hate for such a history for this variety and the work that's been done with this variety in the US, and with Oregon. And Oregon in the sommelier world and wine world, is synonymous with Pinot Noir and Pinot Gris. So I would really hate that Oregon lose that because of, Pinot Grigio being a bit of a cash cow and not making serious styles. And so I really appreciate that this 1 acre, it's probably some of the oldest vines of Pinot Gris in the valley, Janie. And, true to form, you continue to protect these old vines that are maybe not so popular anymore, but really are part of our heritage and really important for the diversity of this place. So
we had a big aha moment, or Chris did, after we made the transition to biodynamics in 2002. This Pinot Gris was always blended into the Amicus. He really was not a fan of it. Neither was Jimmy. So it was never a standalone Pinot Gris, but after we had been farming biodynamically, I think it was the 6th year. It usually takes about 5 years to completely convert and get everything in the right health and the right mode for farming for biodynamics. He tasted it one year and he's like, this is totally changed. Like the fruit profile is totally different. The complexity of this fruit is totally different. Can we start bottling a Pinot Gris on its own? So that was kind of our entree into it.
That's great. I love that story. Since we have these two, the two products open, the Love and the Pinot Gris, I started after I got sent home with a bunch of cans of Love, I started playing around with sangria type thinking. So I'm going to encourage everyone to mix them together.
Yeah. If I may, yeah. So
go Matt.
Kombucha is consumed for a lot of different reasons. Many of them health and wellness, but it's also a really great, fermented drink break that can extend the evening when you're having many glasses of wine, and you probably should maybe mix a glass of water or something in. But it's also a way to extend a really good bottle of wine, or to save yourself from a bad bottle of wine. I think the first time I made kombucha sangria, we had gotten, a $4.99 7-Eleven bottle of white wine or something. I was like, well, I can't actually drink this after we opened it. But then we mixed it 50-50 with kombucha and put it on ice, and it was delicious. So, I think kombucha sangria is, I think there's a chance that could go big, but for now it's very small.
Yeah, I think there's a huge chance it could go big. And to your point, maybe the Brooks Pinot Gris is maybe a little too good to be mixing kombucha into it. But I thought it was so delicious.
The production team kind of shrugged and frowned when I brought up the idea. They weren't really thrilled about it, but
winemakers, they're so sensitive. So much ego. Whereas, I, as a master of wine, think that wine needs a little bit more fun in its world. And so I'm up for mishmashing in different fermentation products. And we all need more probiotics in our life. And the natural fermentations, the lower alcohols, I think it's all good for everyone. And it allows me to day drink and still get work done. So what does everyone think of this? Did anyone actually blend their Pinot Gris and kombucha together?
Nicole said it's a really fun combo. Kim liked it too.
Great, love it. So let's jump into tasting then the superberry.
Absolutely. Again, we've been making this forever. Obviously, we've added little tweaks here and there along the way. But yeah, it's a recipe of dried berries and oolong tea. I think that we just want it to have a bit of that. To me, it I think of Oregon summers, I think of raspberries and blackberries and strawberries, right? And so I think this was the original idea when I concocted the tea at the tea house, was to try to have something that had that kind of berry, berry basket, if you will, or your quintessential Oregon picnic. So that's kind of what we're going for.
Yeah, and I bet it would make an amazing iced tea as well for the summer.
Always, yeah.
Maybe even a little bit of mixer in there, you could make some gin or vodka, kind of concoctions with it as well for iced tea. That would be fun.
Yeah. Oh no, we absolutely have. This is one that a lot of kids like sweet drinks, right? Kombucha is being is getting to be pretty popular with kids as like something that's not soda pop or an energy drink or what have you. But there's still sugar content there, right? But the dry superberry tea that everybody received in their packages kids love as well. And there's no real sugar content, right? There's a little bit that comes out of the dried berries, but you're steeping it. So it's a much drier liquid that you can add sugar to, but it really comes out great as just a nice tart hot tea, or as a refreshing iced tea that kids like, and it doesn't have any sugar.
Yeah, that's great. There's a question from Nicole about the variety of oolong that you use in the super berry.
It's a Wooey Mountain oolong. So it's about oolong is the space between green and black tea, right? So oolongs are, like, green tea is unoxidized and black tea is 100% oxidized. It's all the same leaf, Camellia sinensis.
Oh.
Really, once you start letting it wilt, right, or decompose and oxidize, it's turning into, it goes through oolong all the way to black tea. And so oolongs are typically oxidized like 18% to 80%. So 18% is a lot more like a green tea, and 80% a lot closer, darker, makes a darker liquid, more of that earthy flavor of a black tea. So this is right in I believe it's around 60% oxidized. It's a fairly dark liquid, and it gives it a little bit of like a toasted, earthy flavor to the kombucha. I can taste, but yeah.
Yeah, there's sort of a toasted sesame, umami sort of undertone there, which it goes.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well done.
I like it. Janie, shall we jump into the Pinot Noir?
Yes. So we have the 2017 Crannel Pinot Noir. Dick Crannel, first off, is a wonderful farmer. He owns the 20 acres right below our estate vineyard. And one of the things that's super interesting I find about his site and why we love it so much is his family has been farming on the Eola Hills for over 100 years. So his property's been in the family for a really long time, but they were primarily orchard farmers with peaches and cherries. And in early 1980s, the person that planted our vineyard, Don Byard, approached Dick Crannel and said, you really should be planting grapes. So it's kind of an up and coming crop, and you can have them forever and whatnot, and it's the new thing. And they talked about it, and Dick realized what it would cost to rip out an acre of his orchard and put in an acre of grapes, and decided that he couldn't do all 20 acres at the same time. So he ripped out his orchard and planted grapes over a period of 18 years. So from 1984 until 2002. So on one site of 20 acres, you have vines that range in age up to 18 years. So same clone, same farmer, same hillside, but we keep all of those in individual blocks, small lots, ferment them all separately. And when we make this Crannel Pinot Noir, there's a little bit of all of them in this wine itself. A great B Corp and kind of 1% story with Dick too. He's been a conventional farmer for a really long time. And a few years back, he asked me for more money for his fruit. And my response to him was, I'm willing to give you more money under one condition. And that is you convert to biodynamic farming. And I got the courage to say that and to be so forthright about it by going through the B Corp process and really looking at your supply chain and what your expectations are of your suppliers, and believe in it so much that I had no problem saying that to him. And he ran up the hill. I was in California. He ran up the hill to Claire and he said, Janie wants me to do this thing. I don't know what it means. And he came to find out that it was basically no more passes in his tractor. So it was no more tractor time in the vineyard. He would just change what he was spraying in his vineyard to something that met the biodynamic principles. And then he would have to buy a new implement for his tractor that could help with the weed control underneath the vines instead of using any sort of spray. And so I don't think he had bought a new implement for his tractor for 20 years. He was like a candy store. And then he figured out he had to get this one implement that nobody else in the Willamette Valley has. So it really inspired him to be able to do something new. And so we're super proud that we now have his 20 acres adjacent to us that are also farmed biodynamically.
Yeah, and it's beautiful. I'm sitting here looking over it at the moment. So I've got the best view straight over the Brooks Vineyard and over the Crannel Vineyard and to the Cascade Range. And it's funny that I didn't think of this earlier, but as soon as I put my nose in this, it's the one thing that I've always been attracted to about Eola Amity Hills Pinot Noir is that there's always a distinctive tea leaf, and almost like a kelpie tea leaf character to it. And just after kind of connecting with that earthy tea character in the superberry, I stuck my nose in the cranal, and it just has that dark tea and blueberry, and it's a wine glass full of antioxidants to me.
The other great thing about Dick, for any of you who have been to the winery, before COVID, when we had bar stools, Dick, it's his cheers. He comes up every day at 3:30 and has his own bar stool and stays till 5. It's been really hard on him with COVID with no bar stools because he hates to take tables away from other people. So we haven't seen him as often. But he's pretty much part of our establishment at Brooks.
He is, yeah. Is he on this today?
He's not.
Wow. I'll probably see him up at the tasting room. And 2017 was a pretty warm year as well in the Willamette Valley, and so this wine for me has so much of those sort of Oregon dark berry fruits to it as well, and so I actually can't think of a better pairing to try and match kind of the flavor components from the kombucha and the Pinot Noir as well. I love how ripe the fruit is, but it still has that savory tea leaf sort of grippiness in the tannin profile.
And for all of you that are participating in this and have done our other Beyond Brookses, Bree does put that strategy of tasting to figure out which wines we're going to pair with the product of our partner. It isn't random. It's very, very, very specific. Once we have that product. So we actually got 3 different kombuchas from Matt and then determined which 2 we wanted to use and which wines to pair them with.
Yeah, it is a process. It's a fun process, but it is a process. And sometimes the things that you think are going to work just have nothing in common and are complete clashes. But when you get something that comes together so well, and even, sometimes I get a little fatigued from the tasting and thinking about and writing notes and thinking about the connections. And then, so I may be like, oh, thank goodness I found something at the end of this. But then when I come back to it after not having tasted it for a couple of months, I'm super excited by this pairing. Okay, so I'm going to ask you as well now to mix the 2 together, because for me, when I did this the first time, it was I think it was still in October, and it was, it still had some warm weather around. And so when I added them together, I wanted to have the kombucha chilled to bring a little bit of brightness and freshness to the wine as well. And it just goes so well together, the berry flavors, and the kombucha brings like this grapefruit citrus sort of lift to it, that, and you can throw some orange and strawberries and raspberries in here to make it a little bit more summery if you wanted to.
It's delicious.
Yeah, that's
Isn't
a great
that
one.
fun?
Like that.
Yeah.
I have a whole new line of cocktails. I'm super excited.
Me too. And this is what, fermentation is, so good for, for our immune systems, for our digestive systems, especially when it's made naturally like these products are. And I just think that there should be a lot more, fun in the fermentation world and connectivity than being so siloed into our individual industries. I'm having a ball doing these crossovers with cider and kombucha, and we got coffee coming up. So I hope everyone else is enjoying it and having fun. Janie, is there anything else that we need to touch on with the wines, or shall we just get ready to join the lounge? And can you tell us about the next month's campaign? And can we thank Matt for his amazing story today? I feel like I could listen to that story time and time again. It's so inspiring, Matt, and such a pleasure to have your products and know that you're right in our backyard. And yeah, I'm just so happy to have met you. Thank you.
Well, my pleasure to be here, and I love visiting the winery, and can't wait to come when we can bring a bigger crowd as well. But have brought my family out, and we enjoyed sitting in the truck.
Gotta use that truck for something.
That's right.
It's a great meeting here, and I still, man, I want to have our production teams cross over when COVID's gone, and we can actually be in each other's facilities, because I think it would be fascinating to do an in-depth tasting with our winemaking team, with your production team, and vice versa. Oh yeah, I know my team would go for it. I think it's funny. All of us who work in fermentation are always so curious, right? About. Because we see the same thing every day. We're dealing with the same fermentation, and there's some new stuff we do, and obviously we're passionate about it. But to share that passion with somebody else and kind of see it fresh, right? That how people react to what you're doing, and then to learn from and kind of geek out together on what each other. And there's so much transferable information and ideas that happen not only on the production side, and that's what we found on the business side. So it's great and inspiring and motivating and gets people excited for sure. Yeah. Well, thank you for being with us. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Matt.
My pleasure.
Thanks. I'll see you in the lounge with some sangria.
And I will share with everybody, our next Beyond Brooks is with Work-Life Essentials. And this is moving us a little bit out of, it's not a beverage, it's going to be aromatherapy, but we all know that our most important sense is to smell. And that has so much to do with what we taste. It has so much to do with our mood. So important, all the different botanicals, whether they get fermented into something like kombucha or wine, or whether or not it's just through aromatherapy. So Diana Blank is an amazing, inspiring woman from Work-Life Essentials, and she will be with us in February on the 20th for our next Beyond Brooks. So we're looking forward to that. And I want to just thank one more time, Matt, for you being here today. And it'll be a good opportunity for everybody to join him in the lounge if you want to. So we're going to open up the lounges for a half an hour. There's 3 of them. There's one that I will be hosting, one that Bree will be hosting, one that Matt will be hosting. All you need to do once we open them up, which will take us a minute, is to click on the 3 buttons on the right and the one that says join. You pick your room and you join, and you can move around rooms as well. So enjoy the next half hour while the lounges are open. Thank you so much for being a part of Beyond Brooks. As you can tell, Bree and I continue just to get more and more excited and enthusiastic about doing these, and we hope that you are too. So we'll see you in the lounge.